I had been so open with the doctors and the medical team that were present. But the neurosurgeon who was present in the room, he was the one who, said, I'm not going to stand here and listen to this. And he stormed out. He had been, even after the experience happened and I had to return to see him, he walked into the exam room and put his hand right in front of my face with his finger spread open and said, if you want to talk about what happened during your myelogram, then you can get out of my office and find yourself another neurosurgeon.
Can you believe that?
Yeah,
my word.
Yeah, he was very close to the whole thing. And so I think it scared him. I really do. I think it somehow internally scared him. So, it was a while before I could talk with anybody. And luckily, the Discovery Channel bypassed me because what they ended up doing was doing a 2-hour special, and they reenacted someone else's near-death experience, and they brought skeptics on to basically discount that person's story. And, this was 7 years ago or so. The media is much better now. And that person had been telling his story for a while, so it didn't affect him in his, bravery of telling it. But if that had happened to me almost the first time that I told
you'd have said, I'm never talking about this again.
Exactly.
Yes.
I would have stopped. So it wonderfully unfolded here in Santa Barbara. A friend of mine worked for the major newspaper here in town, and she wanted to put an article in the newspaper about my near-death experience. And when the writer came to interview me at the end of the conversation, he said, well, why are we putting your near-death experience story in the newspaper? And I knew that IANDS existed, and I knew that there were groups out there, some in California and other states as well. And I said, well, let me call you back because I'm going to call and see if I can start a group here. And that's what started my wonderful group here in Santa Barbara.
It's great. Now, let's talk a little bit, because Barbara and I are experts in two different areas. She's an expert on NDEs. I'm an expert on completed deaths. And everyone needs to just understand all of these people having near-death experiences are in a crisis health situation of some kind or other. I'm told that not all of the people are actually, the body is dead, but you're in extremis in some fashion, almost always, and that knocks you out of your body, as happened with Barbara. Some of these are amazing experiences, as you know, Barbara. They travel astrally, they do all kinds of things.
Right.
Now, is that how it's going to be when you die? No. Nearly all of our deaths are planned ahead of time. And the process of actual death, which I'll talk about at some point, is based on hundreds and hundreds of accounts by people who have finished the trip and died in a planned death. They're amazingly similar, even across cultures. So we will talk about that. It's just a different experience. But NDEs are extraordinary in a number of ways. They prove to us so many things. They prove to us, number one, your mind can easily exist away from your body, as happened with Barbara. Your mind can be perfectly aware when your body is totally zonked and, maybe technically dead. They prove that if you are blind from birth, you don't even have eyeballs. Someone had a near-death experience in that situation, and he reported for the first time in his life he now knew what sight was because he could see during his NDE. There are so many wonderful things about NDEs that it's really worth studying them. Just know that they're not exactly like your death experience will be. There are things that the tunnel and a light is interesting. Talk about that for a minute. Many people see a tunnel and a light.
Mm-hmm. That's about 20% of the people who have near-death experiences. 80% of the people just simply rise above their body like I did, and then end up either having an experience with a spiritual being or a loved one that tells them they need to go back or whatever, or they're asking to go back like I did, and then I got to go back. It's kind of an extended experience where the people have a tunnel, they see a light, they have perhaps their deceased loved ones there or a spiritual being, or they go far out into the universe where they're out amongst the stars basically, and they end up returning, usually because they want to return in most situations. But some people are actually reticent to return. They want to stay in that.
A lot of them are, actually.
Exactly.
And they go through a depression sometimes when they get back. Oh, I can't believe I signed up for more of this. It's so much more wonderful when you're outside of your body. So as Barbara just said, many people who have NDEs will astrally travel, which is what's happening when you go to the end of the universe and have other extraordinary experiences. It's just a wonderful thing. Now, what is the tunnel and light, though? Because here's something which strikes me. I have read hundreds of accounts received primarily through deep trance mediums from people who had died in a normal death. And never once, when they were describing their transition, never once was there a tunnel. And yet it's so common in NDEs. Now people think everybody's going to see a tunnel and light when they die. I've come to understand, Barbara, what I think it is. That you're not set up to die. I mean, there may have to, get the welcome committee together real fast because you may be going to die completely and never go back. But I think it's a wormhole among the levels of reality, because the lowest post-death level is extremely bad. It's what Jesus called the outer darkness, where there will be wailing and gnashing of teeth. And to protect you from that, I think what they do is they open a wormhole from this level of reality to the third level, which is the Summerland level. That's what I think it is.
Yeah, it very well could be. Yeah, because there's only about 20% of the people who have an NDE actually see that tunnel and the light and travel through that tunnel. So yeah, that could be their protection to get them over to an area where they're able to deal with them in this situation.
Yes, protect them from having bad encounters, for example.
Right, yeah.
But I think it's fascinating. And why did it start in really like the 60s? That seems to be when they started to be able to resuscitate people fairly dependably. Before that, if your body got to be in as much extremis as Barbara's was, it probably was going to be a one-way trip. Mm-hmm. You'd still be rescued because maybe that wasn't a planned exit point, but it was Dr. Moody who first noticed that, hey, when we resuscitate people, some of them tell amazing stories.
Yes, and that's how IANDS started, with a number of doctors and researchers that decided to start investigating this. Of course, the very first encounter that was written up was by Plato, and it was the soldier E.R., and he was recounting his near-death experience, and Plato wrote about that. So that's the very first one that they have on record.
Isn't that wonderful? Don't you love it?
It's been, generations and eons ago that these have been happening. But I think that, it may have been spoken about in the old days, or it might not have been spoken about, because I do know a friend of mine who's spoken about the 1970s about it, and he was in the hospital after a motorcycle accident. He talked to two doctors about his near-death experience, and one of the doctors decided that he needed to be committed after he got healed. Yeah. And he's a PhD, and he's now, speaks about it. In fact, he's coming to my IANDS group this month to speak. And he talks about how the other doctor realized that it wasn't something that needed to be psychiatrically helped, and snuck him out of the hospital so that he wouldn't be committed after he healed from his injuries. Yeah.
Oh, amazing. My goodness.
Yeah.
It's and this is something else we'll be talking about in a different episode of Seek Reality, but people who are in the medical field and in the whole general field of the broad sciences very often cannot deal with this stuff. And the main reason is that they are stuck in a materialist dogma situation, which has been going on for almost 100 years, where they won't study anything that's not material. And the fact that most of reality is not material, of course, makes it very hard for them to do anything worthwhile, and they haven't done much that's been worthwhile, and certainly in the field of physics for 100 years. But that's another story. So, when do you talk to people who've just had NDEs? Are you people? Tell me about that. Are they scared? Are they thrilled? How do they feel?
Well, generally, it's people who find me via the documentary that's online that's had about 300,000 views now in the last 2 years. And I'm very easily found off of the IANDS website because I run the Santa Barbara group. And so I get emails and I get phone calls. And so it's usually not right after they've had it. It's usually they're finally opening up to it and assimilating it into their life, and they want to talk to someone else who's had one. And so it becomes kind of an advisor type thing and kind of a, camaraderie. Oh gosh, you had one too. I'm so thankful to talk to you.
Oh, isn't that great?
Yeah. So that's what I know part of my life purpose was. But I wanted to talk to you also about Jeff Olson. He was in a major car accident in Utah when his wife died and his infant son died in the same accident. And he was very, very damaged with his legs crushed. He had an amputated leg after they got him to the hospital in Salt Lake City. And he had a seatbelt that cut through his abdomen and through his intestinal tract in multiple places. And then he had his arm almost entirely ripped off from his body. And while the 3 trauma teams were working on him in the trauma unit, there was a nurse that was in the room but not assigned to any of the 3 teams, basically getting equipment for the 3 teams. And she looked up above his body. They were working on all 3 parts of his body. And she saw his deceased wife floating above his body, watching the ordeal that he was going through, and basically felt that she was thanking the teams up above the body. And so she ran to get another trauma doctor, and he is a longtime Salt Lake City trauma doctor, Jeff O'Driscoll. And Jeff O'Driscoll entered the trauma room, and he also saw Jeff Olson's wife's image above Jeff's body. And so now the 2 of them, Jeff Olson and Jeff O'Driscoll, are traveling and talking and coming out of the closet medically to say, yes, this is a situation that, medical teams need to understand happen, just like my orthopedic surgeon finally saying to me, your near-death experience changed my medical protocols.
Yes.
This is important for medical teams to start addressing this and understanding it.
That is wonderful to hear that they're sharing that. But that's nice. I've not ever heard of someone. Well, I suppose the fact that it was a multiple fatality or near fatality event would make it so that would be where she'd want to be. You should want to be with him, making sure he was going to be okay.
Yeah. He ended up having a near-death experience where he saw a hallway. He walked to the end of the hallway. There was a crib in the hallway, and his little son was asleep in the crib.
Oh.
And he ended up picking up the little child and holding it against him in his near-death experience, and then a being came up behind him and wrapped his arms around Jeff and the baby and said, "Are you ready to let your son come to me now?" And it was Jesus, actually. And he said, "Yes, I am." And he ended up giving his son to Jesus. Yeah. So
you just literally gave me goosebumps.
Yeah. It depends on what you're, I think that your ending situation in a near-death experience depends on what you believe. And that if you believe in Jesus, or you believe in God, or you believe in Buddha, or you believe in something else, that's what they send to help you be comforted during your transition. Let's emphasize that.
Yeah. Many NDEs do have religious aspects.
Mm-hmm.
In the actual afterlife, no religion is practiced at all.
Exactly.
That we have been able to find. But these experiences are exquisitely, perfectly tailored to you, to what you need, to who you are.
To make you feel comfortable as you go through the experience.
It's so extraordinary. Yes.
That's beautiful. I thank the other side for that.
This just shows us how completely we are loved.
Yeah.
Because many people are afraid. Fear is, as you know, fear is pervasive, and Christianity fosters it. People are afraid of God. They're afraid of hell. They're afraid of the devil. They're afraid of all kinds of things. Yeah. No, the only thing that exists, and most NDEers will say something to this effect, the only thing that exists beyond this material reality is love.
Yes, absolutely. Oh my gosh, yes, absolutely. And when you understand that there is something beyond the material reality, and that I don't know, I call it the other side. And I have had so many moments in my life where they have come through to help me, in fact, even save my life in a situation where we would have run into the bottom of an overturned semi-truck on a very dark freeway during a huge wind event north of Santa Barbara about 4 years ago.
Well, talk about that. I didn't hear about that. Talk about